Chapter 16 Management of Natural Resources. Natural resources.
Nature has gifted us with resources such as water, air, soil, minerals, plants, and wildlife. These are our natural resources. Man is totally dependent on the nature for his survival. All his material needs of food, clothing, housing, vehicles, fuels, etc. are obtained from nature. In ancient times, man's needs were limited, and so he lived in peace and harmony with nature. Today, however, man is living in an age of advanced science and technology. With an increase in the standard of living, man's demands too have increased. Continuous growth in human population, improvements in healthcare, and other factors have resulted in an increase in the demand for natural resources at an exponential rate. To meet the needs of ever-burgeoning population, man is overexploiting the natural resources, thus causing their depletion. Industrialization and increased use of fossil fuels are polluting our environment. The world is facing problems like water crisis and energy crisis due to pollution and depletion of natural resources. It is, therefore, our duty to conserve our present resources and safeguard the environment from future damage. Use of efficient and eco-friendly technology will help us in reducing pollution and protecting our environment.
Efforts to protect the environment and natural resources.
Key decision makers at all levels, like in international communities, government agencies, and business enterprises, should make environmental friendly decisions and focus on sustainable use of resources. People should be made aware of the environmental related problems and make a conscious effort to minimize them. A global democratic outlook and environmental commitment is essential. An effective management of resources requires participation from countries and non-governmental organizations. Several acts, treaties, and policies have been made for the same. The first United Nations Conference on Human Environment, or UNCHE, was held in Stockholm, Sweden, from the 5th of June to the 16th of June in 1972. Representatives of 113 countries across the world, along with many international and non-governmental agencies, attended this conference. The aim of the conference was to focus on human activities in relation to the environment and to lay the foundation of environmental action at an international level. The conference acknowledged that the goal of reducing human impact on environment would require international cooperation, as most of the problems affecting the environment are global in nature. An organization called United Nations Environment Programme, or UNEP, was launched in this conference. The objectives of UNEP are promoting international participation and cooperation in addressing environmental issues and environmental policy, monitoring the status of the global environment and interpreting the environmental data gathered, arranging to enhance environmental awareness and offer policy to advise the government, society, and in the private sector. Coordinating UN activities on matters concerned with the environment. Developing regional programs for sustainability. Helping environmental authorities, especially in developing countries, to formulate and implement environmental policies. Helping to develop international environmental law. India is the first country in the world that has provided constitutional provisions for the protection and preservation of the environment. Indian Constitution has formulated strict laws which put obligations on each state as well as every citizen of India to protect and improve the environment.
Environment Protection Act 1986.
The Environment Protection Act 1986 came into force after the infamous Bhopal gas tragedy. Some powers have been invested on the central government to protect and improve the environment. These include planning and execution of nationwide programs to prevent and control environmental pollution, laying down the standards for the emission of environmental pollutants from various sources, laying down the standards for environmental quality, laying down procedures and safeguards for handling of hazardous substances, assessing manufacturing processes, materials, and substances which could cause environmental pollution, restricting areas in which industries and other establishments are to be set up.
Emission standards. Euro norms designated as Euro 1 and Euro 2 are emission standards implemented in Europe. It states permissible emission levels for both petrol and diesel vehicles. In India, it is adopted as Bharat norms.
Bharat norms are emission standards which regulate the output of air pollutants released by cars. They also ensure that the amount of harmful pollutants released while manufacturing automobile products are reduced. Many automobile companies manufacture products adhering to the Bharat norms. Such products certify that they are eco-friendly. If we use such eco-friendly products, we will help in controlling the pollution effectively.
Ganga Action Plan.
You all know River Ganges. Water of River Ganges is considered holy by many Indians. However, it was found to be polluted with both domestic as well as industrial waste. The major pollutants that contaminated the water of River Ganges were sewage from cities and towns located on its banks, untreated effluents from industries, and runoff from chemical fertilizers and pesticides used in agriculture. Solid wastes, including animal carcasses and even human corpses, were dumped into the water every day. In 1986, the Ganga Action Plan was launched to clean up the River Ganges. The main objectives of the plan were to improve the quality of water, make it potable, and provide safe bathing along the river. The objectives of the Ganga Action Plan were achieved by intercepting and diverting wastewater to sewage treatment plants instead of letting it flow directly into the river. Other pollution control methods like solid waste management were also used. Emphasis was laid on public participation and creating public awareness to keep the river Ganges clean.
Parameters to detect water pollution. Several parameters are used to detect the water quality. pH, turbidity, total dissolved solids, TDS, suspended solids, dissolved oxygen, etc. are some of these. To detect pollutants present in trace amounts but causing serious threats are detected using sophisticated instruments like atomic absorption spectrometer. Presence of coliform, a group of bacteria found in human intestines, is detected by microbiological analysis. Total coliform count in water indicates contamination by disease-causing microorganisms.
Factory wastes that flow into water bodies contain acidic substances. These substances harm fishes and other aquatic life.
A change in the pH of water indicates the presence of acidic or basic pollutants. This can be detected by using a litmus paper or universal indicator. On adding universal indicator, drinking water, which is neutral, will turn green in color, indicating a pH 7. If the water in a water body is polluted with acidic substances, it will have pH value less than 7 and show color gradation from yellow to red depending on the acidity. Similarly, if the water is polluted with basic substances, it will have pH more than 7 and turns blue on adding indicator. Reduce, reuse, and recycle approach.
We can follow the 3R approach, that is, reduce, reuse, and recycle in order to protect our environment. The most effective way of protecting the environment is to reduce the amount of Earth's resources that we use. It means that we use less resources. One can reduce the amount of solid waste at the source itself. For example, use less paper and less plastic carry bags.
We can reduce the amount of plastic that we use in different ways. We can use jute, cloth, and paper bags instead of polythene bags. This will reduce the quantity of non-biodegradable materials that are discarded in garbage dumps, rivers, and seas. Once we reduce the use of non-biodegradable materials, we can save the energy used to make them. In this way, we can save important natural resources like petroleum and coal.
Fix leaks and dripping taps at once. Leaking taps at home, school, or any other place waste a lot of water. A dripping tap can cause a loss of up to 72 liters of water per day. Hence, a leaking tap must be repaired immediately.
One can save electricity by switching off unnecessary lights and fans. We can reduce the use of liquid petroleum gas (LPG) by making use of solar cooker for cooking food. If the mineral resources are used sensibly and repeatedly, mining and dredging for their search can be reduced.
To reuse means not to throw the old goods away, but to use the same goods again and again. As a result, the demand for new goods is reduced. One can use plastic bottles and jars, aluminium foils, and plastic bags over and over again before recycling or disposing them off.
Containers made of plastic, glass or metal that are used to pack food items can be reused to store things. The glass bottles that are used to sell soft drinks are most often collected back by the company. They are carefully cleaned and refilled. Used sheets of paper can be reused to make useful things like paper bags, greeting cards, and wrapping paper. You can reuse various boxes and other materials to make pencil holders, scribbling pads, etc. Shoe boxes can also be reused to store things in your room.
To recycle means rather than throwing materials away, they can be recycled. Used and discarded materials like plastic, glass, paper, and metal are sent to the respective industries where they can be converted into the useful products. The new products produced by processing materials from old and used products are called recycled products. If we reduce, reuse and recycle the available products, it helps in cutting down the amount of energy used to produce new items. It also helps in conserving natural resources that would otherwise be used to manufacture new items.
Sustainable use of resources.
The development in industry, infrastructure, medicines, and housing has resulted in the deterioration of the environment. True development will be achieved when growth and rise in the standard of living will not harm the environment. Sustainability is the process suggested to improve the quality of human life without harming the global environment. It is necessary to combine good technology, research, political support, awareness, and the participation of communities in order to conserve resources. Some of the objectives of sustainable development are: reduce pollution by using eco-friendly technology, restrain the use of natural resources to ensure availability for future generations, protection of environment, social equality in accessing resources, continuous economic growth.
Why do we need to manage our resources?
We use all the things like food, clothes, furniture, fuels, vehicles, water, etc., which are obtained from the resources available on this earth.
More resources are required to sustain the increasing human population, due to which people overexploit the available resources. With the ever-burgeoning population, the demand for housing has increased multifold. This has resulted in clearing of forest areas and reclamation of land from the sea. This explosion in population has increased the demand for food grains and other agricultural products. To meet this demand, farmers tend to overuse fertilizers, thereby making the land infertile.
As the amount of resources on the earth is limited, due to huge increase in human population, demand of resources also increases day by day. Hence, proper management is required to ensure that the natural resources are used judiciously. The proper management can ensure equal distribution of natural resources so that all the people can get benefits from the development of these resources. The proper management body must indicate about the damage caused in the environment during the use of natural resources and must find ways to minimize the damage. Forests and wildlife.
A forest is an ecosystem, that is, a community of plants and animals interacting with each other and with the physical environment present around them. Forests purify the atmosphere by releasing oxygen and absorbing carbon dioxide. They play an active role in bringing rains and preventing soil erosion, flooding, and landslides. Forests are homes to different kinds of birds, animals, and plants. They house over 60% of the world's total biodiversity and are a storehouse for a variety of mineral resources like minerals and mineral fuels.
Due to diversity in the organisms present, forests are known as biodiversity hotspots.
Biodiversity is important for the survival of all living beings. Every living organism depends on other organisms for their basic necessity, food. All living creatures are supported by the interactions among organisms and their immediate environment. A biologically diverse natural environment provides humans with the necessities of life and forms the basis for the economy. Therefore, we need to look after wildlife in all its forms, be it birds, mammals, or any other living being growing there. It is very important to conserve the vast biodiversity that exists on this planet, not just because species provide services to humans, but also because they help other species in many ways like pollination, nutrient cycling, regulation of the atmosphere, and climate.
Stakeholders of forests.
When we consider the conservation of the forest, some are the stakeholders who take part in the management of forest. The people who live in or around forest are dependent on forest products for various aspects of their life. These people get firewood from the forest trees. They cut the branches only and pluck the leaves, but they do not cut down the whole tree. They cut bamboo for making their huts and baskets. They make use of wood for making agricultural implements and collect fruits, fodder, medicines from the plants. In fact, people living near or in the forest have developed practices to ensure that the forest resources are used in a sustainable manner. The Forest Department of the government owns the land and controls the resources of the forest. The forest is a good source of revenue for the government. Most of the revenue comes from the sale of cut-down trees for the timber. In order to plant trees for timber, such as pine, teak, and eucalyptus, huge area of the forest is cleared of all vegetation. Therefore, large amount of biodiversity is destroyed in the area, which is harmful for the environment. The forests are also damaged by constructing the dams in the forest as well as building the roads through the forest. The industrialists who use various forest products think and consider the forest as merely a source of raw materials for their industry. Timber industry, paper manufacturing industry, lak industry, and sports equipment industry are mostly dependent on forest. Tendu leaves are used for making beedis. The main source of tendu leaves is forest.
Industrialists who exploit the forest produce for their benefits never focus on its sustainability. They recklessly cut down the trees, and once the area is cleared, they move on to other areas.
The nature and wildlife enthusiasts want to conserve nature in pristine form, that is, original form. These people are not dependent on the forest, but they want that forest and wildlife should be conserved to prevent the damage to the environment. In our country, there are instances of local people working traditionally for conservation of forest. For Bishnoi community in Rajasthan, conservation of forest and wildlife has been a religious belief. Amrita Devi Bishnoi sacrificed her life along with 363 others in 1731 for the protection of khejri trees in Khejrali village near Jodhpur in Rajasthan. The Government of India has recently instituted an Amrita Devi Bishnoi National Award for Wildlife Conservation in the memory of Amrita Devi Bishnoi.
When traditional uses of forests are restricted to prevent deforestation, it leads to further damage of the ecosystem. For instance, nomadic shepherds grazed their flocks on the alpine meadows. When it was made a reserve area of the Great Himalayan National Park, the grazing was prohibited. Now, as the sheep are not grazing in this area, the grass grows taller and falls over, preventing new growth. Preventing the local people from the management of forests is not an appreciable approach. They utilize the forests in a sustainable manner. It is other interventions that cause damage to forest and wildlife.
Forests are cleared for agriculture, forestry, housing, and other developmental activities like construction of roads and building of hydroelectric plants.
Arrangements made in the forests for the convenience of tourists also lead to the damage of the ecosystem. Sustainable management of forests and wildlife.
Forest management is the effective management of the forest to judiciously use its produce like fodder, fibers, timber, medicines, gum, resins, etc. Forest management involves conservation of forests by planting trees that are cut regularly. It also ensures the continued production of its goods, such as timber, fuel, wood, etc. Grazing animals eat the young trees and destroy their leaves and branches. They may also injure the roots and the trunk of the trees. Hence, it is essential to prevent overgrazing in order to protect the forests.
Conservation of forests should be done by addressing both environmental and developmental issues. exploitation of forest resources should be controlled and the income from these resources should be shared with the local people. Ecological conservation combined with decentralized economic growth should be the guideline for sustainable management.
The Chipko movement is an excellent example of public participation in the forest conservation programs. Chipko movement was started in 1970 by the tribal women in the Himalayas. It was aimed at the protection and conservation of trees from the woodcutters by embracing them.
The Andolan was originated from an incident in a remote village called Reni in Garhwal in the early 1970s. There was a dispute between local villagers and a logging contractor who had been allowed to fell trees in a forest near the village. One day the contractor's workers appeared in the forest to cut the trees, but the menfolk were absent. However, the women from the village reached the forest quickly and clasped the tree trunks, preventing the workers from felling the trees. Thus, the forest trees were saved. The Chipko movement had far-reaching impact. It led the government to consider the role of local people in the conservation of forests. Another example of people's participation in the management of forests is the revival of the sal forests in the southwestern districts of West Bengal. Initially, the villagers were alienated from the forests by the forest officials. In the absence of traditional methods of surveillance, the forest was degraded. Moreover, the alienation led to conflicts between the Naxalite militant peasant movements and forest officials. In 1972, the West Bengal Forest Department realized that the alienation of the villagers from the surveillance of forests had led to the faster degradation of the forest. Consequently, the Forest Department decided to involve the local people in the surveillance programs. Under the supervision of the forest officer A.K. Banerjee, villagers were involved in the protection of 1,272 hectares of degraded sal forests of the Arabari forest range of Midnapur district. For supporting the forest officials, the villagers were given employment in silviculture and harvesting operations. They were also given 25% of the final harvest. They were allowed to collect fuel wood and fodder by paying a nominal fee. With the participation of the local community, the Arabari forest was revived by 1983. The degraded sal forests was revived from a worthless state to a value of about 12.5 crores. Water for all. Importance of water.
Life is impossible without water. 3/4 part of the Earth's surface is covered with water. 97% of hydrosphere is ocean. The remaining 3% of the total water is fresh water. It is in the form of snow in the polar region and in the form of rivers, ponds, lakes, etc. Some amount of water is seen in the form of water vapor. All the organisms depend on the water. Water is an important medium for different chemical reactions of the cell. Beside this, water plays an important role in control of the climate conditions. Seawater keeps the atmosphere cool or hot by absorption or release of heat.
Water is used in agriculture, industries, and in the production of electricity. Usually man depends upon fresh water.
Distribution of water.
The earth depends mainly on rainfall to maintain the quantity of fresh water. Irregularities in rainfall leads to either floods or drought, causing disaster. Fresh water is a key factor in the life of all living organisms. Some parts of our country have good resources of water, while in other parts there is a shortage of water. The regions having good availability of water are flourishing because they have good crops, but the regions having shortage of water are facing poverty because of poor crop growth. Therefore, it is necessary to have a proper management system so that there is uniform distribution of water to all the regions. There are three sources of fresh water: the rainfall, the river streams, and the groundwater.
Rainfall in India is mainly due to the monsoons that last only for a few months of the year. There are heavy rains over most of the country between June and October.
This rainwater fills lakes and ponds and also flows into rivers. Some rainwater also percolates into ground and becomes available as groundwater.
The groundwater table gets replenished when rainwater seeps down through the soil. However, the level of the water table will be adversely affected if the amount of water consumed is more than that replenished by natural processes. Ever-increasing population, scant rainfall, agricultural activities, and industrialization are some of the factors responsible for lowering of the water table.
At present, we are utilizing nearly 25% of groundwater. Most of it is used in agriculture. The availability of this water is decreasing due to its overuse and deposition of salts and pollutants in it.
Water management. In order to meet the water requirements for various purposes, several irrigation methods were used since ancient times. In India, irrigation on extensive areas is carried out with the help of canals. The main canal receives water from different sources like reservoirs or rivers and is branched further for irrigation. Dams and tanks were also used for irrigation. These methods were locally managed in such a way that both the basic agricultural and daily needs were satisfied throughout the year. The utilization of these water sources were controlled to avoid any misuse. Crop patterns were based on the availability of water. Moreover, the maintenance of these systems were also carried out by the local people. An example of irrigation system managed by local people is the Kuls of Himachal Pradesh. These were canal irrigation systems evolved in certain parts of Himachal Pradesh around 400 years ago. In this system, water from streams were diverted to channels which took water to areas down the hillsides. The people used the water in such a way that during planting season, the areas farthest from the source availed the water first. It was then availed by others, staying progressively higher. The kuls were managed by 2 or 3 people who were paid by the villagers. This system not only provided irrigation but also helped in the percolation of water and recharging of streams. Later, kuls were taken over by the irrigation department. Due to improper management, most of them became inoperative and water sharing also became hostile. With the advent of the British, the local systems of irrigation were neglected. They built large dams and canals that covered more distances. It is still followed in our country. As a result, the people living near the water bodies lost their control over the sources of water. Dams.
For the storage of water, smaller or larger dams can be constructed across the flow of water in rivers. In our country, dams have been constructed across many rivers. The large reservoir of a dam stores a huge amount of water. This stored water is then allowed to flow downstream at the desired rate. Dams are useful to the society in these ways. A. Water from a dam is used for irrigation in fields through a network of canals. Dams ensure water supply to the crop fields around the year. B. Water from a dam is supplied to the people in towns and cities through pipelines after proper treatment. C. The falling water from the dam is used for generating electricity.
Canal systems from the dams provide water to long-distant areas. For example, the Indira Gandhi Canal has turned the arid regions of Rajasthan to greenery. But the benefits were limited to few people as a result of mismanagement. There was unequal distribution of water. People living close to the source cultivated water-intensive crops like sugarcane and rice. This led to reduced supply of water to the people downstream. The locals displaced during the building of canals were not benefited, which led to discontentment among them. Construction of dams across rivers led to several environmental, social, and economical issues. Tehri Dam, built across River Ganges, also posed several issues. Fragility of the ecosystem and relocation of the local inhabitants were the major issues.
Narmada Bachao Andolan is a social movement against the Sardar Sarovar Dam being built across the Narmada River. This dam is likely to destroy the homes of thousands of tribals inhabiting the banks of River Narmada. The tribals, farmers, environmentalists, and human rights activists are leading this movement.
Social problems related to construction of dams are the displacement of local inhabitants without proper compensation or rehabilitation. The protests of people who were displaced during the building of Tawa Dam in 1970 is an example of such an issue. Environmental issues like deforestation and loss of biodiversity is another problem. Most of the projects raise economical issues as it leads to huge expenditure of public money without proportionate benefits. Water harvesting. Water falling on the earth flows through different areas and enters a common water body. The geographic area through which the water flows is known as watershed. Watershed management helps in the conservation of soil and water. It increases biomass production without causing ecological imbalance. It controls floods and droughts. It also increases the life of downstream dams and reservoirs. This type of water harvesting techniques are now adopted by various organizations as an alternative to mega projects. Indigenous water harvesting was done by collecting water in small pits and lakes, building earthen dams, constructing dikes, building reservoirs made of sand and limestone, and rooftop water collecting units. In India, we have many traditional methods of rainwater harvesting, where water is not only stored but also used to recharge the groundwater. Khadins, tanks and nadis in Rajasthan, bandharas and tals in Maharashtra, bandhis in Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh, ahars and pines in Bihar, kuls in Himachal Pradesh, ponds in the Kandi belt of Jammu region, and Eris tanks in Tamil Nadu, surangams in Kerala, and kattas in Karnataka are some of the traditional water harvesting structures. Some of these are also used in water conveyance. These water harvesting techniques are managed by local inhabitants. They ensured proper management and controlled over exploitation of the water resources. The traditional water harvesting system is a crescent-shaped earthen embankment built across a seasonally flooded gully. During monsoon, water is collected behind the embankment. It recharges the groundwater table. Groundwater do not evaporate. It provides moisture to the surrounding vegetation. In addition, it does not provide breeding grounds for mosquitoes. It is also relatively protected from contamination by human and animal waste. Coal and petroleum.
Natural resources such as coal, petroleum, and natural gas are called fossil fuels. They are called fossil fuels because they were formed from the organic remains of dead plants and animals that lived about 300 million years ago. Fossil fuels are found in deposits beneath the earth. Now let us understand how these fossil fuels were formed. About 300 million years ago, the organic remains of plants and animals mixed with silt and mud to form layers. With the passage of time, mineral sedimentation formed on top of the organisms, effectively entombing them in rocks. Over millions of years, absence of air, high temperature, and tremendous pressure of the layers of the earth transformed the dead organisms into fuels. As these fuels were formed over a long period of time, they cannot be replaced as fast as they are being consumed. The stores of fossil fuels are limited, and that is why they are also called exhaustible resources. But today, we are consuming these resources at such an alarming rate that sooner or later their stores would vanish. Thus, there is a need to spread awareness to all the people about the fact that we have to make a prudent use of these resources and use renewable sources of energy more extensively for our needs. Conventional sources of energy like coal and petroleum are very convenient sources of energy, and that is why they are used more than non-conventional sources of energy. The over-dependence on these fossil fuels has paved way to many other serious problems like global warming and atmospheric pollution. During combustion of the conventional fuels, many gases like carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and oxides of nitrogen are released into the atmosphere. The concentration of carbon dioxide gas in the atmosphere is constantly increasing, and this has led to greenhouse effect and global warming. Global warming means a rise in the atmospheric temperature across the globe, which is quite alarming as it results in the melting of the snow on the mountain peaks exceeding the normal pace. Presence of higher concentration of sulfur dioxide has given rise to dangers like acid rain. Use of
chlorofluorocarbon
has led to ozone depletion, thus creating holes in the ozone layer, which is a protective layer in our atmosphere. This leads to the free passage of harmful ultraviolet rays from the sun to the earth, which is responsible for many health hazards. The need for firewood and charcoal has resulted in the unrestricted felling of trees in the forests. Further, the degradation of forests poses a threat to the biological diversity.
It has been estimated that at today's rate of usage, the known petroleum deposits will be over in about 40 years, whereas coal will last for about 200 years only. Conservation of coal and petroleum.
It is of utmost importance that we should conserve fossil fuels and use non-conventional sources of energy like solar energy, wind energy, hydroelectric energy, biogas, biodiesel, etc. The use of renewable resources is free from problems like global warming and atmospheric pollution. In India, we are faced with energy crisis due to the growing population and increasing industrialization. This has led to a higher demand for the supply of energy resources. Our country is compelled to import 70% of mineral oil we use. Therefore, the Government of India is insisting on the development of non-conventional sources of energy. The Government of India has initiated many programs for installing solar panels, windmills, and biogas plants. Nowadays, requirements like technical and financial assistance are made easily available to harness these non-conventional sources of energy. Although the government is creating awareness about the importance of using renewable sources of energy, no company or individual can claim the ownership of these resources, not even the government itself. These are meant for the benefit of the entire human race. In today's world scenario, India is being recognized as a leading developing country. It has been predicted that by the year 2020, India will emerge as a major power in the world. In order to meet the energy crisis, India has resolved to focus on the following points: finding new sources of energy, giving preference to renewable sources of energy, using non-renewable sources of energy responsibly and sparingly, to create public awareness about energy conservation, and to promote the use of devices that can make use of new technology and consume less fuel, such as stoves, burners, lights, etc.
We can follow some good practices in our day-to-day life to avoid wastage of fuels. Pressure cookers should be used for cooking rice, pulses, and meat. Lights, fans, and other electrical appliances should be switched off when not in use. The use of compact fluorescent lamps or CFLs and fluorescent lights which consume less energy should be encouraged. Room heaters and coolers should be used only when absolutely necessary. Public transport systems should be used for traveling instead of private vehicles. How can we conserve fossil fuels? Our vehicles run on fuels like petrol and diesel obtained from petroleum. They must be used carefully. We should try to use environment-friendly vehicles such as bicycles. Bicycles do not cause pollution. A bicycle does not need any fuel. Moreover, cycling is also good for health. We need to save electricity too. By saving electricity, we can save fossil fuels that are used in its production. An overview of natural resource management. The amount of water, trees, minerals, and other natural resources is limited on the earth, while the number of people using these resources is growing rapidly. But the increasing population is not the real problem. The problem is how to use these resources. Whenever one person or group of persons uses more than their fair share of resources or causes an excess of pollution, then this imbalance can lead to problems for others. Hence, there is a need to use natural resources rationally and judiciously.
Sustainable use of resources ensures a better quality of life for everyone and for generations to come. Therefore, we must use our natural resources judiciously so that the future generations do not face the crisis of resources.